good afternoon, or good morning, good evening, everyone. I see people start joining us in the chat slowly but steadily. I want to give you a warm welcome. You've noticed the recording sign. This session will be recorded just for your information. And I'm very pleased to be here. I want to thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Alexandra Severino, and I'm part of the program team of this master program. And we are thrilled to have you here, whether you're considering graduate study, shifting sectors, or deepening your expertise. So I won't take too much time today. I'll ask my colleague Anna to move to the other slide. And this is the plan we have for you. So we'll start with a few insights about our program. Then we'll have our colleagues, Dr. Leigh Martindale and Dr. Grazvydas, talking a bit about the modules of the program. And we'll have my colleague, Dr. Allan Watson, guiding us through some information about our program today at the beginning, right before our colleagues start. We have a great session prepared for you. Our goal is for you to have a glimpse of some of the courses we'll have and a bit more about our information about our master program. This is the second series. There's a previous webinar we organized that you can access to in YouTube. So without further ado, I'm going to give the word to my colleague, Dr. Allan Watson, to guide you through a bit through our program. And then we'll dive in to hear a bit more about two very interesting courses, part of the program, with our colleagues here today. A warm welcome. We are always overwhelmed by the number of attendees we have and are grateful. So a big thank you on behalf of the team, and are looking forward to engaging with all of you. A technical note, maybe before I should have started mentioning that. We have a Q&A box open where you can start asking questions. My colleagues, Dr. Allan Watson, our colleague Anna Moreira in the background, and myself will do our best to respond if they are, practical, quick questions we can answer in the meantime. And you're also very welcome to ask your questions to our colleagues here, Dr. Leigh Martindale and Dr. Grazvydas Jasutis, about their presentations, their courses. We welcome those questions too, and we'll be having also a dedicated space for that in the middle of the session, and we'll then organize them as they go. And you can also use the chat box for any insights, reflections. We are always welcoming those too, and we'll do definitely our best to show you the value our program brings, and to engage you in considering it as an option too. So Allan, over to you. Let's talk a bit about this fantastic program.
Thank you so much, Alex, and welcome everybody, whether it's morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. So I want to spend 10 minutes or so talking a little bit about the kind of aims and structure of the programme. I'm Dr. Allan Watson from Loughborough University. I'm the current Director of Studies for postgraduate taught programmes in the School of Social Sciences and Humanities, where the programme is being hosted. This is a joint programme between our institution, Loughborough University, and UNITAR. It's been my pleasure to work with colleagues at UNITAR to develop what we think is a really exciting and really important programme. The uniqueness of which is it sits at the intersection of, on the one hand, climate change and energy, and on the other hand, humanitarian agendas, and the notion that really we need to think about those two things together in order to progress change within the world today. So I'll spend a few minutes going through some of the kind of overview of the programme details, and then we'll hand over to colleagues who will tell you a little bit more about the kind of specifics of what the sorts of things we'll be teaching on the programme, the sorts of issues that we'll be covering. First thing to say, I suppose, is this is a 100% online distance learning programme, so it's all web-based in terms of its learning. A mixture of what we call asynchronous material, so material that provide online for you to look through and work through in your own time, and what we call synchronous materials. So that's opportunities to be online with us live through the Microsoft Teams platform in the form of lectures and tutorials to engage with us and the other other course mates on your program together within a kind of virtual classroom setting. As I mentioned, it's a collaboration between Loughborough and UNITAR, and if you have a look at the program spec online, which we'll make sure we put in the chat, you'll see that there's a diverse range of modules which draw on the specialisation of colleagues across our two institutions. So whether that's Leigh's specialism in energy, or whether it's Grazvydas's specialism in peacekeeping, putting you together with colleagues who are specialists in these particular areas to cover a diverse range of topics in this particular area. The programme itself will be launching for the first time this year, beginning in the 29th of September 2025. The application deadline, as you can see on the screen, is 25th of August 2025. That's for international or non-UK students. If you're based in the UK, the deadline is a little bit later, right up until the start date. And the qualification that you'll be working towards is a Master of Science, which will be awarded from us here at Loughborough University. We're offering it in two modes. So one is a 2-year mode and one is a 3-year mode, both part-time. The only differences, dependent on your particular circumstances, is where the dissertation module falls. So if you can squeeze it all to within 2 years, then you'll be able to do the part-time program within 2 years. If alongside other commitments or work or whatever it is, practitioner work that you're doing, you need to move that dissertation out into its own year, we can do that, and the program will be completed over a 3-year period. And all of the program is delivered in English. Thanks, Anna. Next slide, please. So in terms of entry requirements, the expectation is that you have an undergraduate degree to what in the UK is a 2-2, or the international equivalent. We're being quite broad in terms of what that academic background might look like. So it might be from the social sciences, kind of broadly defined, and the humanities, or it might indeed be from the sciences, the fields of energy, renewable energy, climate change, environment, and so on, from outside of the social sciences. So we're quite open in terms of background. And it's also important to say as well that we will consider professional background. So if you don't quite meet the entry requirements in terms of academic background, but you have a history of experience related to the sector, then again, we'd encourage you to apply and put all of that experience very clearly into your application, so we can determine if that professional experience will allow you to get onto the programme. We expect a diverse range of people to come onto the programme. So it might be that people are just out of an undergraduate and are looking to go into a master's programme, but also people that are professionals in this particular area. It might include NGO, IO staff, and UN staff, policymakers, humanitarian responders, climate resilience specialists who are looking to kind of upskill or just undertake professional development activities. All very welcome onto the programme. There's obviously a diverse range of skills that you'll acquire as part of the modules. Some of those very much academic, but also to say that we are really very keen as part of the programme to make sure that there are real world grounded learning opportunities, so that the theoretical constructs that we deal with and the case studies that we deal with aren't just abstract, but allow you to apply them and interpret them in terms of real world situations. So the applied nature of the course is really quite important. Yes, the other thing to say, I think, as well, is one of the key elements of the programme, and I don't want to say too much about this, Leigh, to steal your thunder, so I know you're going to say a little bit about this in a short while, is energy systems modelling. And we have an institute here at Loughborough called the STEER Institute. So I read from my notes, which is Sustainable Transitions, Energy, Environment and Resilience, which is a leading centre in terms of applying energy systems modelling to kind of complex real world problems. And that's an important part of what we'll be doing as part of the programme. So shortly I'll hand over to Leigh, and Leigh will be able to say a little bit more about that when he speaks. Just finally, if you're not familiar with the structure of a master's programme here in the UK, it's made up of 180 credits. 120 of those credits are attached to what we would call kind of taught modules. So these are 15 credit modules, a whole series of them. You'll study 4 in each year nominally, that will make up your 120 credits of taught modules, and then 60 credits will be an independent dissertation, which we'll come to in a moment. Again, we'll share with you in the chat the program specification, so you can have a full look at the various modules that you would study if you're on the program. We've listed some here. So these are the ones that you would study as part of your first year of studies, part-time. So a module called Climate Futures, which is aimed at considering, I guess, what we would call alternative climate pathways and how we might use various data and tools to define and communicate what our probable climate futures look like and how we might go about changing those futures. Humanitarian development and climate policy, which is all about that kind of complex interrelationship between humanitarian action and the climate, and the ways in which those two things are really strongly interrelated, and looking into the future likely to be even more strongly interrelated than they are now. Rethinking peacekeeping, which we'll hear a little bit more about in a moment, which is about contemporary challenges and theoretical frameworks as they relate to our response to conflict and crisis. And economic modelling and policy for sustainable development, again, which you'll hear more about in a moment, which is where we're looking at focusing on modelling to help us better understand greenhouse gas mitigation, adaptation, and some of the problems around kind of clean energy in the world today. So there would be the 4 modules you study as part of your first year. And then just to say a little bit about the dissertation, which sits at the end of the programme. Within the dissertation, you'll be supervised by 1 colleague from Loughborough University and 1 colleague from UNITAR, which will give you a really good balance between kind of theoretical perspectives and some of the more kind of applied perspectives. And that dissertation, the topic is yours to choose. Hopefully by that point, you'll have been inspired by some of the subjects and topics that we've covered in the various modules. You might choose to do something that relates to one of the modules that you've studied on the program, or it might be that you want to study something that's very much related to your area of practice or your area of work. There's an issue that you want to research more into, and that's absolutely acceptable as well. So we'll talk through with you closer to the time about the sorts of topics that you'd like to do for your dissertation. Finally, just to say, because the mode of study is fully online, it's partly synchronous and partly asynchronous, we hope that it will work very nicely around whatever kind of working professional structure that you have, so we can be quite flexible in terms of how it's delivered. We like to work around our students, but also in terms of how you do all of the independent study around other commitments. There'll be various tool trainers I've mentioned, for example, energy modelling, lots and lots of kind of real world case studies to bring this alive, and also opportunities for group work so that you get plenty of opportunities to get to know the other students that are on the programme, because we know that studying remotely can be a little bit lonely at times. So we hope to provide plenty of opportunities for you to connect with course mates on the programme and be able to work together in groups towards particular challenges. With that, I'll leave it there and just hand back to you, Alex.
Thank you. Thank you, Allan. I was busy in the chat and with the questions. Thank you for keeping the questions coming. You had an overview from my colleague of the key elements of our program. If I might add, I just wanted to say that, and Dr. Allan just focused that this program results from this unique collaboration between UNITAR and Loughborough University. On our side, we have expertise in delivering specifically at the online level and the higher education level with online delivery. My colleague, Dr. Grazvydas, has experience on that too, and Loughborough is well renowned for its higher education programs too. So you can see that we try to blend academic excellence with also hands-on policy relevant training. And what we hope is to equip you with the tools that tackle global challenges in an integrated systems-based way. My colleagues, as Dr. Allan said, will dive into more detail into that through the lens of sustainability, energy transitions, and humanitarian response. So we do believe in what we have here. But to tell you more about all that, or to give you an example of all that, I'll give now the word to my colleague, Dr. Leigh Martindale, where you can hear a bit more about this interesting course and on mapping and modeling the Sustainable Development Goals. Over to you, Leigh. Thank you.
Thank you very much, guys. So first of all, welcome everyone. It's really exciting to see how international the chat is with people from all over the world. That's really, really exciting. So yeah, briefly about myself. I'm Dr. Leigh Martindale. I'm based at Loughborough and Imperial College, London. And I've been in this kind of energy modeling policy space for about 4 or 5 years now. And teaching these modules, and also taking part in summer schools in developing parts of the world as well, introducing some of these modeling skills. But yeah, so really the key kind of expectations, I guess, from these two particular modules is modeling, so energy modeling, as Allan mentioned. So learning how to kind of take data, do something with it, and then put it through a model and get results, and then try and understand and analyze those results. And that kind of pipeline is quite useful in any type of work, really. Even if you don't sort of stay in modeling, that kind of big data, manipulating data, and then doing something interesting or useful with it, creating visualizations, creating graphs. That whole workflow is very transferable in many jobs, especially sort of environmental consulting jobs or jobs where you have to use lots of big data. And the other kind of key aspect of these modules is linking that kind of data analysis bit into actually useful policy, or how it can be making that bridge between all the analysis and data, and then communicating to policymakers, stakeholders, and trying to make that kind of that bridge between results and then how you can impact in the kind of real world, how you actually influence policymakers and make a difference based on these results. So before I unpack these modules in a bit more detail, I've just got a question for us all. If we go on to the next slide, yes. So if you could just scan the barcode and think about this question here: which UN Sustainable Development Goal has the most synergies and connections with other SDGs? Okay, great. So I think we've got some results in. Yeah, so I can see a few answers here, and the answers, perhaps surprisingly, or maybe not if you look at the title of the course, but the answer is actually SDG 7, clean and affordable energy. Now, you might have gone with something else, poverty or climate action, and that's very understandable. They feel very fundamental, right? But here's the fascinating thing that most people don't realize. The energy connects to, I think, 143 SDG targets out of 169. So that's about 85% of all SDGs somehow linking to energy. Okay? I mean, if you think about it this way, you can't run hospitals without electricity, you can't power schools, you can't pump clean water, you can't preserve vaccines in fridges, you can't run the factories that make jobs. Think about internet connectivity that drives modern economies, that all requires energy. And this kind of recognizing these sort of links and synergies is exactly the way we approach these challenges in our modules. Okay, it's that kind of big picture type approach. Okay, energy is not just connected to other goals, it often creates cascading effects. Okay, if you build a dam for clean energy, for example, you might affect water security for a different country downstream. Ethiopia, for example, she's built a huge dam. great for them, clean energy, but Egypt are, are very concerned about their own water security issues. When you make the choice to choose solar over coal, you're not just cutting emissions, you're also changing employment patterns, air quality, and maybe geopolitics, okay? And this is systems thinking in action. So in these modules, we don't just study energy policy in isolation. We map these connections using cost-benefit modeling, economic modeling, and that's what we do in the mapping and modeling module, but also maybe more qualitative, looking at things at individual and community scale. Because often the biggest policy failures happen when we try and solve these challenges sort of one at a time, bit by bit. The biggest breakthroughs happen when we see and model the whole system. So across both these modules, we're really tapping into this idea and connecting to Loughborough's research expertise, as Allan mentioned, STEER, which has got two kind of key components which we'll be kind of utilizing in these modules. So the first kind of key component I want to talk about is MEX of STEERs, okay? And it's like kind of a good real world example of this kind of big systems thinking that I've been talking about. Okay, so MEX is modern energy cooking services. Okay, you might think cooking, really? How's this so important? But this is where the system thinking gets kind of powerful. Okay, so if you consider that over, I think it is 2.5 billion people still cook with polluting fuels, things like wood, charcoal, etc. That's about 1 in 4 people on Earth. Okay, so these health impacts that come from that cause lots of premature deaths. A lot of health issues across the globe. Okay. But from a systems perspective, this is where it gets thinking, okay? So the traditional approach would be just go, right, let's just give everybody clean cook stoves, okay? Done, okay? But actually, when you think about it as a system, you realize it's simultaneously an energy access issue, perhaps a gender equality issue, an air quality challenge as well, deforestation driver, and also perhaps an economic development barrier, okay? So MEX, led here at Loughborough, kind of really figured this out. Okay, they don't treat clean cooking as an isolated problem. They're asking, how do we integrate clean cooking into broader energy access, electricity access in these rural communities? Because if you're already planning to build a new renewable energy infrastructure, connect communities to the grid, why not design a system that can facilitate the cooking loads from the start, okay? And this is very much systems thinking in practice. So at MEX, we've got people who have worked on the ground. They go to these communities, they do qualitative research, understanding the various sort of entanglements involved in this energy access clean cooking issue, okay? So yeah, this is very much an example of research-led teaching. They'll share stories of what happens when you assume that people want electric cooking, but maybe the electricity is not reliable enough. Or maybe how you design policies around gender empowerment, but maybe miss the cultural complexities of who actually makes the cooking decisions in these different contexts. So it's actually quite messy, quite complex, and really kind of quite interesting for the reality of sustainable development policy making. It's where the technical, social, economic, political all intersect. So that's what we'll be discussing in these modules. We'll have guest lectures from MEX themselves. You might have met Ed Brown in the first semester. So international world-leading researchers, often involved in events like COP and UN-sponsored events, very much doing on-the-ground research about this at the moment. Okay, so that's kind of one half of STEER, kind of one half of the module. If we go to the next slide, I'll introduce you to CCG. Yeah, thank you. So CCG, climate compatible growth, and this is more of the quantitative modeling kind of part of STEER. Okay, so if we return back to that question I asked about how many targets are linked to the SDGs, how many are interconnected, you know. How do you kind of model or think about 143 interconnected targets? You know, how do you make sense of all these cascading effects between energy, water, land use, climate? You know, how do you turn this complexity into something useful for policymakers? Okay, and the only way you can do this really is by modeling it in some way. Okay, and so there's two kind of open source modeling tools linked together, Osmosis and CLEWs, which were kind of pioneered by this center. And this is where CCG comes in as a research center. It's all about equipping kind of critical mass professionals in country, in developing countries, with the modeling skills they need to support their country's energy transition. So yeah, let me give you a concrete example. So let's imagine you're advising a government in Kenya. They want to achieve universal electricity access by 2030. They've got to meet climate commitments. They've got to ensure food security. They've got to manage increasing water stress. Traditional approaches were to take this, you know, in siloed, tackle it separately. Okay, energy ministry handled energy, etc. Okay. And often, typically, you might have to go for an expensive global north-based consulting company to help them with the modeling. But with these open source tools, CLEWs, for example, climate, land, energy, water systems modeling, you can simulate all these simultaneously. You can ask, what happens if we grow more crops for bioenergy, you know, fuels for transport? You might get cleaner energy that way for transportation, but does that compete with your agriculture, you know? What is the right balance between agriculture and biofuels? This modeling tool can help decide what the best policy is in this regard. If you're using electricity for irrigation, for example, how does that affect your energy demand projections? How many more power plants will you need to build if you're irrigating or you're agricultural? Okay. And as I mentioned, this is all open source, these tools. So rather, you know, you don't need to go through a consultancy firm for these countries. Don't need to go through consultancy firms to use them effectively. So the bottleneck really is just developing the skills to use these tools effectively. And often CCG hosts summer schools, inviting people to come and learn how to use these modeling tools. So they're not just academic tools, is what I'm trying to say. Okay. In fact, they're often used by the United Nations Development Programme to support countries in their sustainable development planning. Whenever you see those integrated assessment reports, you know, informing about climate negotiations, they're often built and based upon these models. So in these modules, you're not just going to learn about these tools, you're going to really use them. Okay, you're going to build your own models, run your own scenarios, and generate the kind of analysis that shapes national energy strategies. You know, lean towards creating policy. And again, we have some guest lecturers here who have done this. They've taken, you know, modeling insights from Osmosis, CLEWs, and actually shaped national policy. You know, we've got Jairo from Costa Rica, for example, who's literally done that. And also we might be hearing from my ex-students who have gone on to stay in this space. You know, it's quite a niche, high demand skills, these modeling tools. And, you know, I've had students who have stayed in this area and, you know, they work for CCG now, or they're doing a PhD like Nevis. So hopefully we'll have guest lectures as well from this expertise. But yeah, I guess to sum up, really the idea is that we can kind of go beyond just recognizing this complexity of how all these things are interlinked, okay? And then also that next step of actually managing it in a way to, you know, to begin making useful policy suggestions from these results. So yeah, I'm very excited to have all these people here, and hopefully I'll be meeting you guys in person. Great, so I'll hand over to my next colleague, but I look forward to any questions in the final part of today's session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leigh. and I was myself wondering, how I can immerse myself in different ways into the course alongside being part of the program team. So I hope that we were able to give you through Dr. Leigh's input some insights into this intention that we put into the program in terms of considering the so many different elements that compose the climate, energy, and humanitarian action fields and their interconnections. Thank you so much, Leigh. Once again, I now hand over to my colleague, Dr. Grazvydas Jasutis, for us to reflect a bit on rethinking peacekeeping. And I think from some of the elements Dr. Leigh just shared, we can see the connections of all these elements and intrinsic nature of systems and how they dialogue and the impact they have on peace or conflict, depending on what we are looking at. So although this does not seem like a very, let's say, logic segue, there's a segue here that we want to explore and to show you and hopefully convey something important that is also part of our program. Over to you, Grazvydas. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alexandra. Thank you very much, colleagues. Indeed, it's my great pleasure to be a part of, and indeed, such a program is a big deal. And if you look at these different elements and of course faculty, it's really amazing. So therefore, indeed, it's a big step forward. And indeed, I encourage all of you to look at and see if you definitely want to be a part of, and I do encourage you. Now, a bit about myself, and I'm originally from a tiny country, from Lithuania, but indeed, I started my career as a Minister of Defense, then I joined NATO headquarters, dealing with operations in Afghanistan, Somalia, Kosovo and other countries. Then I was deployed in the field. I spent a number of years in different continents. And I looked at the chat. I saw someone is from Indonesia. So I was in Aceh after tsunami in 2005. Or also I spent some time in Afghanistan. Then 5 years in Georgia, monitoring ceasefire agreement between Russia and Georgia. So indeed, my added value, I always say, I can bring you, because you can read the theory from books, but what I try to do, I try to bring my practical experience, my insights, and indeed, I'm ready to discuss different dilemmas, because this course is about dilemmas in my view. And indeed, when we look into the peacekeeping, development and humanitarian aid normally, yes, let me share several examples so as you could also better understand that. I think you all remember what happened during the evacuation at Kabul airport in 2021. It was indeed at that airport what I saw. It was not just the collapse of a government. I witnessed the panic of civilians caught in geopolitics and the consequences of strategic failure of international community, sad to say, but this is what happened. And families were pressing babies into the arms of soldiers, then professionals simply became survivors. And from this conflict analysis perspective, Kabul was a case of failed foresight and flawed assumptions. And of course, early warning signs were, I would say, visible, growing dependence on international security guarantees, the erosion of legitimacy, and yet these indicators were not fully translated into action. And what happened was not just a security breakdown, it was a breakdown in institutional listening and international leadership. And this experience reminded me that peacekeeping is not just about mandates or blue helmets. It's about being present when others disappears. It's about human protection, moral courage, and the capacity to adapt under pressure. And it's very much linked, of course, to development and humanitarian dimensions. And my second example would be, and this is what students or practitioners or professionals, they tend to ask me about the United Nations, its role, because this is what we see. It's it's a struggle. And for instance, right now, the UN has struggled to respond effectively to the war in Ukraine. And while it has taken, I would say, meaningful actions in certain areas, such as humanitarian aid or documentation of human rights violations, it has largely failed to halt the conflict or enforce its own charter principles. And for instance, if you take this matter program, definitely what I can promise you, you can definitely participate in a lively debate on that. For instance, yes, you can ask the question why UN has responded in that way in Ukraine, and there are different reasons to explain. And what I like and what I always offer to the students is sincere discussion. It's not about your political affiliation. It's not about what you think. It's about, yes, different stories. And if you say me why UN responded in this way, maybe you like or you don't. But indeed, what we saw is we saw these structural problems and all attempts to pass resolutions at UN have been blocked. Or also we can also think that UN, they have no standing army or coercive power to enforce its resolution. Again, it depends on member states for implementation. So therefore, you can't simply blame UN, this international structure, for limited actions. But also, even if you think so, you also have to think about some successes of the UN. Again, coming back to Ukraine, yes, situation is really dire and really complicated. But for instance, people tend to forget that in July 22, the UN, together with Turkey, they brokered an agreement between Ukraine and Russia to allow the safe export of grain and foodstuff from Ukrainian ports, which had been blocked due to the war. And of course, it matters because Ukraine is one of the world's largest grain exporters. And of course, this war disrupted global food supplies and threatened famine in several countries around the globe. So therefore, this deal, for instance, sponsored by the United Nations, helped stabilize global food prices, deliver over 30 million tons of grain and food products, and avert broader food crisis. So therefore, what again, I want to reiterate that this massive program will stimulate your thinking. And indeed, contemporary peacekeeping is evolving rapidly in response to geopolitical, technological, and humanitarian shifts. And while traditional missions, if you look back into, focused on monitoring ceasefires or separating warring parties, new challenges are really pushing peacekeeping into more complex and multi-dimensional roles. And again, I can just share with several examples that and what kind of challenges are the contemporary peacekeeping. That's why, even this course says rethink peacekeeping. Why to rethink? But indeed, right now, what we see peacekeeping even in the absence of peace. And peacekeepers are often deployed in active conflict zones, and they are targeted by armed groups, limiting their neutrality and safety. Also, UN missions, I would say, in different countries are increasingly confronted by jihadist militias or transnational criminal networks. And, these actors, they do not recognize ceasefires or political arrangements, making UN engagement and protection mandates much harder to implement. Sad to say, but also some governments now try to challenge peacekeeping mandates, or even they expel the missions. So again, we have some examples of that. Then, of course, the core task of UN missions is protection of civilians. And peacekeepers are now expected not only to monitor, but to, I would say, actively protect civilians even under threat. And this, of course, requires new capabilities, intelligence information, rapid redeployment tools, and rules of engagement that balance security with restraint. What's more, we all understand we live in this right now digital world, and UN missions, indeed, they now face cyber attacks, digital disinformation campaigns, and surveillance from hostile actors. Of course, UN has limited capacity to address information warfare, which can erode local trust and manipulate perceptions of peacekeepers. This is very important. We also can look into artificial intelligence, because, you know, emerging artificial intelligence offer new tools for the UN to deal with the issues, but also for hostile actors. And they do use also artificial intelligence to challenge the mandates, and UN peacekeeping missions definitely have to look into. What's more, climate change. Needless to say, we definitely see the consequences in our daily life, but in a conflict, the active conflict zones, it's becoming even more complicated, because climate change intensifies conflict drivers such as water scarcity. For instance, I spent some time in Mali, and I remember it's really complicated. Then displacement, and of course, resource competition. So therefore, you know, peacekeepers must navigate climate fragility risks and may need to support resilience and environmental protection in vulnerable regions. Indeed, just now to sum up, because as you see, there are lots of challenges. We can talk hours and hours about that. But just to sum up, I think this program offers open intellectual debate for you to learn, to participate, say openly what you think, share it with colleagues, receive information from top experts, discuss, and helps you to make an informed decision about your future career and about the future of this world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Grazvydas, for highlighting, also giving the different examples that translate the complexity of the current peacekeeping landscape. Let's call it like that. And thank you also for highlighting that we take a critical eye. So you took the chance to give some examples in which, from your perspective, UN is not, you know, necessarily responding enough or in a way that addresses all the needs. And it's an honest debate and discussion, and it started here. As you can see, we are not assuming as this having a component of an online UN program through UNITAR that, you know, we are here to solve all issues without questioning it. It's that debate that we want to promote from, of course, and naturally, considering this is a master program, from an academic, theoretical, strong basis lens, but also bringing the additional practical layer that we know is so important if you want to work in the field. I also want to take this chance to note, and this was a highlight from our colleague Anna, that we have been having around 75 engaged attendees for all the session. You are staying with us, you're here and wanting to hear more, and I just want to take the chance to thank you again. We are impressed by your interest and your commitment to the session and learning more, and hopefully joining us in September. We have been addressing some of your questions. There are some technical questions about applications in the Q&A box. Thank you to my colleague, Dr. Allan Watson, for taking the lead on those, as some of them respect indeed to the procedures with Loughborough. We are also collecting questions. If you have specific questions about these courses, that our colleagues were showcasing here, it's a good opportunity to ask them. Just a note to say that as per the rules and the ways these webinars are organized, as we are so many, the mics are not activated. So if you have a question, indeed you would need to use the chat. And we still have a few minutes for that. I'm just checking here if there are questions. We continue at the practical level information stage. But I wanted, maybe I can start to just I got curious, and it's stronger than myself. I always feel part of the audience too. So I was thinking, reflecting on what you both said, and I wanted to maybe invite Dr. Leigh to reflect a bit on that, because you were talking about your specific module, but about these integrations, the systems thinking approach, and all that. And I wanted to ask you if there is something that you'd like to add, also from some of the practical examples our colleague Dr. Grazvydas just mentioned, that come to your mind, where the modeling and the tools that you were showcasing might be useful, or if you see some level of connection with those.
Great, thank you very much for the question. Yeah, so I guess I guess this kind of speaks to my approach to teaching generally, to lecturing. I know, I guess, climate change and these resource issues can be framed as wicked problems, and I think we definitely live in an era where it could be feeling so overwhelming. You have these wicked problems. It's very difficult to even think about solving them. So I like to think that these modeling tools are perhaps a small step in helping rethink about them as problems and making them slightly more manageable. Being able to use big data and kind of manipulate it into a way which can be something useful for policy. So yeah, I guess you can feel quite powerless in front of all these wicked problems like climate change. And I think a big part of these modules help students or help participants get a kind of grip or some sort of solid footing on these type of issues, and find pathways to somehow sort of manage these complexities into something that can be helpful and useful, especially in what is kind of a grim world in many respects at the moment. So I like to think that these tools allow a form of empowerment for participants, in this context of these really bad, wicked problems we're living through right now.
Thank you, Leigh. Thank you so much. And thank you for bringing the concept or the notion of wicked problems. I think that is one of the concepts that most come to mind whenever we open, some news media outlet these days. Is just there's no other way to configure the situation sometimes as to call it wicked, because of all that you just mentioned now. And I have another question, and this one is for our colleague Dr. Grazvydas, because you have been teaching with us in different courses that very much relate to conflict and peace studies, and I wanted to ask you. You joined us in this new venture with Loughborough and this specific program, and I know of your interest in these topics, but I wanted to ask you, how do you see, from your wide experience with peacekeeping, but also as lecturer and academic within the fields of conflict and peace studies, the need to integrate this climate energy lens into the humanitarian action dimensions, for instance, and all these understanding and debates around peacekeeping and conflict and sustainable peace?
Yeah, thank you for this question. And my response would be simple. I look at the issues of peacekeeping or even peace and conflict studies from this holistic perspective. And sometimes, you know, students also, that I teach, they approach me, listen, yes, my background is, you know, I'm a medical officer, or I'm just a school, I'm a teacher. Can I really become a peacekeeper? And I say, yes, of course, because we have to understand peacekeeping holistically. Peacekeeping is not only blue helmets, you have your blue vest and you try to monitor the implementation of ceasefire agreement. No, right now the peace is related to almost everything. It's you arrive, for example, in a conflict affected community, and these people want to eat, they want to go to school, they want their kids to play in a playground, they want to go to the police to report if something happens, they want to have a normal life. And therefore, each and any profession, and it doesn't matter what you do. I mean, and also this study course, of course, is important because you can get more knowledge, better understanding. But holistically speaking, you can be a peacekeeper. And think about yourself. I mean, even in your family, you are a peacekeeper because you try to reconcile, you try to advise your partner, you want to deal with your kids. So this is very important. And what's more, of course, for instance, climate change, we cannot disregard it. And I remember my time in Mali, and these problems related to the conflict was related to the water's scarcity. Okay, there is a lack of water, there is a lack access to land, and that's why, you know, people tend to become hostile. And if, for instance, climate change issues would have been resolved, it would be much easier. Or I was in Uzbekistan in Central Asia, which is not far away from Afghanistan. Again, there is an Aral Sea, which has disappeared. What does it mean? People who lived there, they had jobs, they used to fish, they used to deal with agriculture. I mean, they got engaged. Now the sea disappeared as a result of climate change. And of course, what can you do? How can we support this community? How to make sure that their life becomes sustainable and decent? So therefore, again, I just want to reiterate my message. We have to take into account all these aspects, from climate change to sustainable development, because we have to look into this holistically. Thank you.
Thank you so much, colleagues. There's a question in the chat, which I think it's important and provocative in a good way, from MD Kaida, and states, with your respect, may I ask if you have taken any steps or initiatives to mitigate the adverse effects of climate change? I'll let my colleagues add to that, and from our perspective, and of course, getting back to the notion of wicked problem, or really concerning issue, probably the one of the most important of our times. It's difficult to say, you know, I've done that, and that definitely contributes to mitigating climate change for sure. But on our side, there has been a significant intention on the activation, implementation, and commitment towards the Sustainable Development Goals, and a key emphasis on education as a path to contribute to mitigate, as you say, the adverse effects of climate change by training, by equipping, by mainstreaming access to knowledge, by putting intention into designing programs that we feel respond to needs as this one. On my side, this is my reflection. I could take a lot longer to respond to the question, but I wanted to ask perhaps my colleague again, because as part of the program team, it makes sense. Dr. Allan Watson, if there are a few words you'd like to say about this, and then to my colleagues, Dr. Leigh and Dr. Grazvydas, if you'd like to add to this very provocative but very relevant and say a needed question. And I'm glad you made it.
Thank you, Alex. Yeah, this is a hugely important question. So I suppose we might answer it at two different levels as an institution. The first is what we do about climate change in the day-to-day running of the university. So I'd invite you all to have a look at the university's strategy on our web pages, and you'll find that climate change and net zero are a really fundamental part of what we do and our strategy going forward. And the university has all sorts of plans and strategies that have been implemented to cut carbon emissions from an institutional point of view. We have, for example, revisited what we do in terms of taking students on field courses internationally and considered the worth of doing those, and air miles, and as just one example of what we do as an institution. The other thing that we think about as an institution, however, is the value of putting out people into the world who understand these issues and who are likely to go out and progress these agendas and to make a difference in terms of the future of the planet. And Leigh already touched on this somewhat in terms of graduates from our programs going out into the world and doing good things. So that's a real positive from an educational point of view, is training the next generation of students that will go out and make a difference. Yeah, Leigh, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to kind of maybe kind of add to that. I know, for example, that STEER has been a hugely important part of what we do as an institution in terms of progressing this agenda.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, CCG are very much, are involved in the whole pipeline for especially developing countries, going from finding necessary data, and then all the way to using that data as a way to justify, energy transition, why, and financing it as well. How do you finance, let's say you've worked out you need this amount of solar capacity, this amount of wind capacity through your modeling based on data, then how do you also finance it? Ideally without getting huge, debts from the IMF or the World Bank. So there's that kind of whole pipeline. This organization at Loughborough, CCG, STEER, is involved in and sort of helping enable, especially in the developing world, the mechanisms and strategies and the expertise and know-how to do it without going through kind of global north institutions. Ultimately is the long-term aim. So any kind of part of that component you can sort of help or contribute to. I guess for me, it's the capacity building. It's teaching participants how to use these tools, but there's many sort of different links on that whole chain. They call it data to deal, or data to making policy, and how you actually all those little links, connecting all those links together for a country to kind of make that argument for the renewable energy transition. That's all quite grand, I guess, on an individual level. It's actually hit home to me, actually, living in climate change. I've just moved house. I mean, a community which has been impacted by flooding. UK flooding is a big issue. And so now I've become very aware of flooding and stuff like that. And, getting out as a community WhatsApp group and making sure the nearby brook is not getting built up of debris and stuff. So actually living day to day in climate change is, you can feel that happening now, even in different places. So yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and there's many different scales and layers that you can hopefully make a small step into contributing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have also a very specific question on whether the course would also cover the climate change impacts on the microorganisms in water bodies, or how the microorganisms or microalgae can reduce the climate change impacts. That I would leave for you, Allan. And
yeah, if I can take that, Alex.
To respond. Yeah.
Yeah. So strictly speaking, the answer is no. This isn't a particularly science-based program, although in the department we do have on-campus programs which would consider those sorts of things. I think the thing is, if you've got a particular interest, we're thinking, I guess, as part of the program on a kind of much grander scale, and that's not to undermine the importance of the micro scale. As a geographer, we do all sorts of scales. I would, think about how you might progress that interest there as part of a program where you understand some of the broader problems. And then when it comes to the dissertation, you might want to think about how a very specific challenge relates to a broader issue, I suppose. So no, it wouldn't be delivered in any of the taught programs, but something to consider maybe in terms of an interest for a dissertation project. Alex, if I can, so I'm aware of time, just very quickly, I wanted to use a question in the Q&A as an opportunity just to say a couple of things. A lot of the questions have been today have been very technical about the application process and funding and so on. Just to say that I know my colleague Anna from UNITAR will be emailing those who have registered and participated in the webinar with various bits of information that will include prospectus pages and scholarships and so on. So please do take the time to look through that. The other element is, what do I need to apply? So there's lots of questions about how to study for a bachelor's degree before reaching a postgraduate qualification. There are many answers to that question, but just to say, this is a postgraduate program, so it does require you to have a bachelor's or a equivalent experience prior to applying. So we don't particularly have any answers in terms of bachelor's scholarships or bachelor's programs. So that's something to maybe consider with our institution, if you like, or other institutions that are local to you. Also, in terms of background, there are lots of questions in terms of, does my background fit? As I mentioned at the start, we're very open in terms of backgrounds. This is quite a broad program, so we welcome those that have a background in the social sciences, but also those that have a background in the sciences, for example, or in engineering. I wouldn't worry too much about a particular academic background. If you have a passion and a want to study in this particular space, the most important thing you can do in an application is to communicate that passion for the topic. Absolutely, please contact us with questions. The questions in the chat here is about strength and application. So if you've got questions about how you might kind of, I guess, reorientate or strengthen a particular application, then please do get in touch with us, and we're very happy to talk through that with you. So I hope that's useful. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you so much, Alan. We are indeed on a bit above time even, which is a good sign, I would say. Thank you so much for everyone for being here, for listening to us, for participating in the discussion, for the practical questions, which we appreciate as they show your interest in our program, the provocative questions too, because they're super important, and there's an element of reflection we try to convey that will be there for sure. So we are immensely grateful for your time today. I also want to give a special thanks to my colleagues here, Dr. Leigh Martindale and Dr. Grazvydas Jasutis. Of course, my dear colleague, Dr. Allan Watson. We have been working very closely and hard in the program, and it's always a pleasure to share these moments where we do some outreach and showcase some of the work that is in the background to the audience, and hopefully show you the value proposition of the program. I also want to thank our colleague Ana Moreira. You hadn't a chance to see her, but all this organization coordination is due to her. Thank you, Ana, so much for your support with these sessions, and also to your kind answers to everyone, and the follow-up you'll do after the session, which I'm sure everyone will appreciate. And I want to thank you again, really, all of you for being here and for your interest in our main climate, energy, and humanitarian action. Before I go, as a reminder that applications are open now. If you'd like, just leave us a thumbs up in the chat if you are considering to apply for our September cohort. It would be great to have a visual of your interest there too, if you'd like, of course. And if you found interest and you feel you're ready to apply, just you have all the links in the chat, but they will be resent, as my colleague said. And if you need a bit more time to think, let's say, we'll be in communication through the follow-up emails too. The deadlines were communicated by my colleague at the beginning of the session, but you can access all this information through our websites too. And of course, we encourage you to apply before the 25th of August for the September intake. We hope to see many of you there, and we'll be in touch in the meantime with different communication and emails. Thank you for a great time this afternoon and for the interesting reflection presentations and for being here. Thank you, everyone. It was such a pleasure. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.